and welcome to the Wisconsin Master Composter Program, Making and Using Compost in Your Backyard, Part 2. My name is Jovan Rossum, and I am a specialist with the University of Wisconsin Extension. In this presentation, I will be talking about how you can make compost right in your own backyard using grass clippings, leaves, food scraps, and other materials from your yard. But first, a reminder about what is composting. Composting is the controlled decomposition of organic matter in the presence of oxygen that can transform waste materials such as kitchen scraps and leaves into a valuable soil amendment. Composting is nothing more than speeding up the natural decay process. A compost pile is used to manage the factors that affect the rate of decay. These factors are air or oxygen, water, what you put into the pile, and temperature. The quality of the resulting compost depends on how well you control these factors. When properly managed, you can create compost that is ready to use in as little as 12 to 16 weeks. Within the compost pile, we are trying to create conditions that are favorable for decay to occur. While we may see worms, beetles, and bugs in our pile, the majority of the composting process is done by microscopic organisms such as bacteria and fungi. These naturally occurring microbes secrete enzymes which release energy from the materials in the pile to support their life functions. Heat is also released, causing the temperature of the compost pile to rise. Some garden centers and other retailers sell compost starters, inoculants, or accelerators. They may in some cases help to get the composting process started a little faster. However, they are not necessary. Rapid composting can be achieved and high-quality compost can be produced without using these starters. The best source of organisms is your own garden soil. Small amounts of soil can be added to your compost pile to provide all the bacteria and fungi it needs to get working. Just 1 teaspoon of healthy soil can have over 100 million bacteria living in it. However, you don't even need to add soil. Bacteria are all over leaves, grass, and other materials you add to your pile. Just keep the microbes happy and they will multiply and work for you. Part of making good compost is creating the right conditions for our decomposers. When food, water, and oxygen are well balanced, our organisms will respond by transforming our waste materials into compost. In the next few slides, we will learn more about each of these components and how they factor into creating compost. While any organic material can be composted, you should not try to compost all of them in your backyard compost pile. Here are some items that can be safely composted in your backyard. Leaves, grass clippings, and other yard and garden debris. Kitchen scraps from fruits and vegetables. Used potting soil, shredded paper or cardboard. Manure from herbivores or plant eaters is also one of the materials that can be composted at home. Some materials are better left out of the backyard compost pile because they can cause problems either during composting or when you use the compost. These materials include meat, fish, and dairy products because of their tendency to attract pests and produce odors. Hard-to-kill weeds such as bindweed and quackgrass and weeds that have produced seed should also be left out. A hot compost pile can kill these weeds and seeds, but backyard compost piles may not reach high enough temperatures for a long enough time to kill these weeds and seeds. Cat or dog waste can also be a source of disease or human pathogens, so leave those out as well. Just like you and I, your decomposer workforce does best with a balanced diet. They need a mix of high carbon materials known as browns and high nitrogen materials known as greens. In most cases, we can achieve a balanced diet by mixing 2 or 3 volumes of brown material for every 1 volume of green material added to the pile. Shown here are some examples of browns and greens. Browns such as leaves and straw tend to be drier than greens and decompose very slowly. Greens such as glass clippings and food scraps are nitrogen-rich materials and tend to be more wet and soft than the browns. Because of their characteristics, browns and greens each have some problems if composted on their own, but they make excellent compost when mixed together. If compost made only from browns is not fully mature when used, it could still be high in carbon and tie up nitrogen in the soil. Because greens decompose so rapidly and are high in moisture, they tend to form a dense mass when composted alone, preventing air from getting into the pile. This can lead to odor problems. In Wisconsin, browns tend to accumulate in the fall, while greens tend to accumulate in the spring and summer. A good system is to stockpile browns and then gradually mix them with greens the following year. We can store browns for later use, but we should add greens to the compost pile as they are generated. Making good compost starts with using a good mix of ingredients. Mix 2 or 3 volumes of brown material with every 1 volume of green, and you will be providing your microbes with a balanced diet. As the microbes decompose the material in the pile, they consume oxygen and generate heat within your pile. The warm, oxygen-depleted air will rise to the top of the pile, drawing in cooler, fresh air from the bottom and sides. The fresh air is also higher in oxygen. The air around us is about 21% oxygen. Our decomposers need oxygen levels greater than 5% in order to survive. If there is no oxygen in the compost pile, anaerobic organisms take over and cause the pile to have a bad odor. To support air movement, we need to maintain adequate pore space. This is the openings between materials in the pile. This pore space allows air to move into and out of the pile. When we turn our compost piles, we open up pore spaces to allow air to move more freely through the pile, ensuring we have adequate oxygen available to our decomposers. I am often asked if it is necessary to shred leaves, twigs, branches, and other coarse materials before putting them in the compost pile. My response is that it's not essential, but its smaller particles will decompose faster than larger ones. Microbes have a hard time getting at the food trapped inside woody materials. If these are shredded, it will speed up the decomposition process. However, there is a downside to smaller particles. These particles will fit more tightly together, reducing airflow in the pile. This may cause decomposition to slow and can lead to odor generation. A compost pile with only small particles will need to be turned more often to maintain pore space. Ideally, you will use a mix of large and small particles to create the needed pore space in your pile. Another essential for rapid composting is having the right amount of water. Bacteria live in water films that surround the materials in the compost pile. If the pile is too dry, the bacteria cannot do their work. If the pile is too wet, the bacteria cannot get the oxygen they need. It is easy to tell if your pile has the right moisture content. Grab a handful of material and squeeze. If the handful has about the same moisture as a wrung-out sponge, the moisture is in the right range. If water drips out, the pile is too wet. If the material feels dry and falls apart, it is too dry and you need to add water. It can be surprising how much water it takes to get a pile as damp as a wrung-out sponge. Even a heavy rain may not be enough to penetrate the center of the pile. Turning the pile as you add water helps to ensure all materials become wet. If your pile is too wet, add some dry browns and turn the pile. Active composting occurs in the temperature range of 50 to 155 degrees Fahrenheit. Your compost pile will normally go through several heating cycles. To get the most active and rapid composting, the pile should be turned when the temperature begins to drop or if the temperature rises above 150 degrees. Temperatures above 130 degrees are not essential for composting, but composting will proceed more slowly at lower temperatures. The cause of low pile temperature usually begins with having excess browns in the pile mix, resulting in a shortage of nitrogen and a slowing of decomposition. Not getting enough oxygen or too much water in the pile, preventing air from getting in, can also result in lower pile temperatures. Ideally, you will achieve temperatures above 130 degrees. At this temperature, we see a reduction in the number of viable weed seeds in the compost. There is also a reduction of plant and human disease-causing organisms at and above 130 degrees. One factor that can influence pile temperature is pile size. The ideal size for a compost pile is about 1 cubic yard. A pile that is 3 feet wide by 3 feet tall is easy to keep aerated, easy to turn, but still large enough to maintain warm temperatures. Piles less than 1 cubic yard generally are unable to reach temperatures above 130 degrees. Piles that are too big can be difficult to maintain and often don't function as well as more appropriately sized piles. Size is an important factor to consider when selecting the type of bin you will use for composting. Many manufactured bins are smaller than 1 cubic yard and thus have difficulty generating higher temperatures. Choose a composting strategy that works best for you. Your strategy will depend upon the amount of materials you generate for composting, as well as the amount of time you are willing to devote to taking care of your compost pile. Your strategy will also depend upon the types of materials you are composting. For example, if you compost kitchen scraps, odds are you will generate a small volume of these each week that are added slowly over time to a cool compost pile. You also may have some piles that are hot piles and others that are cool. You will find out that putting more time into managing will result in compost being created in a shorter amount of time. If you use a hot composting method, you will build the pile all at one time using the proper mix of browns and greens. This method requires that you turn the pile on a weekly basis for the first 4 to 6 weeks while pile temperatures are high. As the pile cools, you can turn it less frequently. Properly managed, you can have finished batch of compost in 12 to 16 weeks. If you choose to use the cool composting method, you will build the pile as materials accumulate and turn the pile every 2 to 3 weeks during the growing season. This is a popular strategy for food scrap composting. Be sure you are still adding a mix of browns and greens. It is also recommended that food scraps be buried in the pile and covered with a layer of browns. This can discourage pests from investigating your compost pile. The cool method will produce finished compost in 6 months or longer. Turning or mixing the pile helps to bring in fresh, oxygen-rich air into the pile by opening up pore space. Turning also moves materials from cool edges of the pile to the center where temperatures are higher. Turning the pile is easier and more effective if you take the bin apart and set it next to the compost pile. Then transfer materials into the empty bin by placing the outer materials into the center of the new pile. Having 2 bins, one that is empty, also works for this transfer. Compost turning tools sold in garden centers may help mix the pile to some degree, but most people find that a sturdy garden fork works best. There are many different options for compost bins. Bins generally work better than heaps or piles. You can build your own from plans that can be found on UW Extension's website, or you can purchase a bin from your local garden center or online vendors. If you get serious about composting, you may find one bin just isn't enough. As you develop your compost style, use a bin or bins that work best for you. Other than the size of the bin, what you put into the bin and how you manage it is more important than the type of bin you use. Also, be aware that some communities require covered bins be used for backyard composting. Use common sense when selecting a location for your compost pile. A shaded area helps keep the pile from drying out in the summer and makes it more pleasant for you to work at the pile. However, a sunny location will warm up sooner in the spring and freeze later in the fall. Be sure the location won't interfere with your other lawn and garden activities and that it fits into the landscape. Place it in a location that it's easy to access. Leave adequate workspace around the pile for filling, turning, and emptying. Considering having space for stockpiling browns in the fall and for storing finished compost until you are ready to use it. Keep your pile within reach of a garden hose so you don't have to carry pails of water when you add moisture to the pile. Be considerate of your neighbors. Keep your pile neat and tidy. Sometimes composting doesn't go as you had planned. If problems arise, here are some possible solutions. If nothing is happening and the pile is dry, add water until the material feels like a well-wrung-out sponge. Another common problem is having too many browns in the pile. A compost bin full of leaves will decompose very slowly, but if we add in some green material, we will speed up the composting process. At the root of foul odors is poor aeration or the lack of high carbon or brown material. Ammonia odors usually mean you have too many greens in the mix, so excess nitrogen is being converted to ammonia. Add browns to balance the diet. If you have a rotten egg smell, your pile may be too wet or not porous enough. The cure is to turn the pile and add dry browns. If you are adding kitchen scraps, be sure you are mixing them into the pile. By burying the scraps, you reduce the chance that pests may visit your pile looking for a meal. Composting is an easy way to transform waste material into a valuable soil amendment right in your own backyard. Remember to feed your decomposers a balanced diet, keep the pile as damp as a wrung-out sponge, and turn the pile when you need to. By using what you learned today, you can begin to transform waste materials into compost right in your own backyard. This presentation should provide you with enough information to get started with a compost pile in your backyard. If you feel you need more information, contact your county extension office or visit the University of Wisconsin Extension online learning store to find more information about making and using compost. In part 2 of Making and Using Compost, I talked about how you can make compost in your backyard. The compost you make is a valuable soil amendment that improves soil health and leads to healthy, more robust plants that grow there. I am Joe Van Rossum from the University of Wisconsin Extension, and this has been the Wisconsin Master Composter Program, Making and Using Compost in Your Backyard, Part 2.